Hi there and welcome to our church Lent course. I'm videoing these sessions as well so you can pick it up at a future time if you can't make Monday evenings. So I hope this is useful for you. Obviously you don't get the interaction you might do in a sort of group setting on Zoom, but hopefully you'll be able to pick up some of the ideas contained in the course itself. It's based on a book by NT Wright called God and the Pandemic. And I just want to explain something. You don't have to read the book, by the way. It's all we're doing is sort of taking some ideas in the book and putting them into a course to get us thinking about the pandemic and how we respond as Christians. This is a Lent course, but that doesn't mean to say it's based around the season of Lent. You could use this idea anytime to think about how we as Christians respond to the pandemic. So hopefully it'll be useful for you in the summer, whatever time, or looking back on this time maybe as a memory, hopefully at one time, of what we were going through during this period. While we're doing the course, it might be helpful to take some notes, to have a paper and pen handy, and just to see what ideas and thoughts come up in your mind as we talk through some of the issues. There's 5 sessions. The live broadcast will be on Mondays at 7 o'clock starting tonight. That's on the 22nd of February. So hopefully you can follow it. And I hope to do a video for each week so you can, as I say, catch up if you can't make the live session. So let's start by thinking about the last year. We'll all admit it's been a difficult time. But I wonder, what state has it left us all in? Now, this is not a scientific or a technical exercise, but if I do that and higher and lower, I want you to think about what state you're in now compared with a year ago, a year of lockdowns and restrictions over the last 12 months. So first of all, physically, would you say you're in a better shape now than you were in March 2020? Or would you say it's gone down? If you do nothing but sit-ups and press-ups and jogging for the last 12 months, or have you found yourself turning to comfort food and watching telly, Netflix box sets for the last 12 months, how has it affected you physically? Just think about that for a moment, and I want you to rate yourself. If it helps you doing that, same as me, then do. But have a think. How are you now physically compared with a year ago? What about mentally? We've heard on the news about a lot of people whose mental health has suffered over the last year. How has it affected you? Do you feel better than you were? Have you been going for long walks and enjoying the outdoors and drinking it all in and feeling positive, being able to take up those hobbies you never had time for? Or has it left you worse off mentally? Has it left you feeling cooped up, cut off from friends and family, cut off from support groups that were so important before? Has it made you realise how important those support groups were? Interesting thought, isn't it? So what about mentally? How are you doing for that? And for those of us who have a faith, Christians, what about spiritually? Better off, worse off? Has the fact that you haven't been able to go to church for much of the last 12 months affected you? Or maybe if you've been picking up Bible notes, if you've been cultivating quiet times, having a bit of time with God each day, do you feel that maybe has done you more good? What about spiritually? Or maybe for the first time you've asked some really deep questions that you never had the time to think about before. So how do you feel you compare with a year ago when it comes to things spiritual? There are many images that we'll perhaps carry from this time later in life. I wanted to share a couple with you which made me laugh. This is a postman wearing armour. And you can imagine some of the bravado that was shown right at the beginning of the pandemic. You probably saw news stories and pictures about these things. Or here's somebody on the tube, on the underground. Again, images of this time. There's been a lot of questions about the facts of the pandemic as well. I want to ask you a question. A lot of people have said right at the beginning that coronavirus, well, do you know what? It's just like flu. Why are we getting so het up about it? But I want to ask you a couple of questions about this. Compared with flu, what do you think the rate of hospitalisation has been with the coronavirus? Now, if we set a benchmark at 5 times, do you think that the coronavirus is greater than that or less? Has it upped the rate of hospitalisation 5 times, or is it more than 5 times, or is it less? What do you think? If I told you it was actually 10 times worse for hospitalisation, would that be a surprise to you? Maybe not. But what about the death rate from coronavirus? If I said the death rate was 15 times that of flu, would you think that's a low figure? Do you think it'd be more than that or less than that? What do you think? Have a think. The actual figure, according to scientists, is 20 times. So it's more than that. It's quite a high figure, that, isn't it? And I think the initial things we saw on social media about, oh, it's just like flu, some of that has been put to rest, hasn't it, by the news and by the figures we've seen day in and day out. Here's some other interesting facts. Who are more likely to get a severe response to COVID? Is it men or women? Do you know that one? It's actually men, surprisingly. And we've also seen things on the news about various ethnic groups suffering worse from the pandemic, and they're not quite sure why. Again, there's lots of things we're learning as we go along. We've heard on the news about people losing the sense of smell. But did you also know there's an increased risk of your blood clotting if you've had COVID? That's quite a scary thought, isn't it? But COVID has also thrown up other problems that were there in the background all along, but perhaps we weren't aware of it. The necessity for vaccinating and treating and looking after our homeless people has come to the fore. But did you realise they reckon there's 250,000 people who are either homeless or in temporary accommodation at this time? That's a lot of people, isn't it? Food for thought. So in the second part of this video, I want us to think about how we face up to COVID. We talked about the real challenge there is as COVID comes to our country, but how do we respond to it? Now, to look at this, I want to go back to ancient Greece. If you know me, you know I'm not really an academic or an intellectual sort of person. But if you go back 2,000 or 3,000 years, the Greeks had some very interesting thoughts about how you cope with troubles in life. Now, I hope you can take in all this. I'll try and put the words on the screen so you can follow it. And you may have heard of these terms before, but please don't be put off by the fact that this is ancient Greece. The ideas are still very much how we think today. So 3 ways of responding to the crisis. The first one is this: stoic. Now, this is a word we still use today, isn't it? That person's really stoic. That means they bear up under adversity. The stoic response is very much in our Christian Protestant work ethic. is you just soldier on, keep your chin up, do the best you can. You could say that in the Bible, Paul was quite a stoic person. He was shipwrecked and put it behind him and got on with life. What about the widow who gave 2 coins and Jesus said she's done a great thing? She faced poverty but still put in her money. Stoic is very much a northern way of thinking. You put up or you shut up. That's stoicism. Do you think that's how you faced up to the pandemic? I wonder. Here's the second one. Epicurean. What a fantastic word that is. An epicure is somebody who just likes to enjoy life. And maybe for you, this whole time has been, do you know what? I can't do anything else. I might as well have a good time. And although you might think this is a bit selfish, you can see why people do it. And in the news, we've seen lots of stories about people having parties regardless of the rules. An epicure is out to have a good time. So that's one way you can respond to the crisis. You can say, well, do you know what? Let's just party anyway. So you've got Stoics who put their shoulder to the wheel and just push on and keep a set face, determined to get through it. You've got Epicures who are the people who try and have a good time come what may. And the third one is those who are Platonists or you're Platonic. Now you may have heard of this in terms of people who have a Platonic relationship. It's a bit more complicated to explain this, but I'll try and do my best. The idea is that everything on earth is just difficult. It's problems, it's illness, it's failure, it's disappointment. But somewhere over the rainbow is a wonderful world of happiness. So really you've got to forget about this life. This life is a waste of time. Just set your mind on the heavenly things and forget about it. And you might think to some extent that is how Christians should respond to a crisis. The only trouble is that with the Platonic response kind of ignores what's going on here and just looks upwards. You've heard that expression that someone's so heavenly minded they're of no earthly use. Well, I suppose a Platonist is in danger of ending up like that. So I'm going to give you a moment. I want you to think which one of those 3 has best summed up your response to the pandemic. Are you a Stoic? Keep on going, don't complain, here we go, chin up. Are you an Epicure? Do you just want to have a good time and laugh it off? Or are you a Platonic person who tries to ignore everything that's going on and just set your mind on the holy, better, pure things there are? I'll give you a moment to think about that. I didn't tell you earlier, but I was going to call this course The Art of Groaning, which is probably not a very good selling point for introducing the course. But really, this is a time when a lot of people have been groaning. And not to say they're just complaining idly. People have suffered in a very real way. And if you want to dig into the Bible and see what the Bible has to say about this, we'll be looking at groaning in the Bible in various forms over the next few weeks. But just to give you a starter for 10, why don't you look at the book of Lamentations? It's in the middle of the Old Testament, and it's Jeremiah's poetic prayer looking around Jerusalem after it had been destroyed by an invading army. Have a look. It's not all doom and gloom, but there's a lot there that speaks of sadness and wondering why this bad thing has happened. The book itself that we're basing this course on God and the Pandemic, says quite a lot about who we blame for the pandemic. The first chapter, which is what we're basing this part of the course on, talks about the politics. And a lot of people blamed China. We talked about, was it a deliberate act from China? We talked about whether it was spread from animals. There have been all sorts of conspiracy theories about how the virus started. But then some people have said not how, but why. They've asked the question why. And of course, that's where God gets dragged in. And you may have heard people complaining that it's God's fault. Or you may have heard some Christians, especially perhaps in the United States, but here as well, saying that this is God's judgment. And recently in the news, you may have heard about a DUP councillor in Northern Ireland who claimed that the pandemic was God's judgment for allowing abortion laws to be passed over there. I found this quote from a Christian writer called Tim Keller, who's somebody I'd recommend. He says this: the real question is not, is this God's judgment? But rather, is it to God who I look to and trust in when bad things happen? The book we've been studying, God and the Pandemic, doesn't tell us what we should do, but might help us think about how we respond and how we form our views of the pandemic. Like I said, we're thinking about a groaning world. So how should we respond as Christians? Here's some thoughts. Let's think about how we're coping. We started off trying to measure how we've done over the last year. Be honest with yourself. How are you doing? Are you pretending that everything's fine when it's not? Are you being stoic? Some people see this as the default mode for Christians operating. You've got to be stoic. If you're Christian, you've got to shut up and don't complain. Is this how we've been running things during the pandemic? Have we bottled it all up and long to just shout out to God and say, help? Have we blamed anyone? Have we moved closer to God during this time, whether it's through having quiet times for the first time, whether it's through having to trust Him and to bring urgent matters of prayer to Him when there was nobody else around to pray with? Has it shown up weaknesses in our own faith? Perhaps we realised that we're Sunday Christians. We need that injection of church once a week. Perhaps it's shown up weaknesses in our own faith. Between now and next time, I'm going to set you some homework. Not really, but I would like you to think about a couple of things for next time. Firstly, have you got any big questions which have come out of the pandemic? It would help me if you could email them to me so I can have a think about them as well. Have you got any big questions coming out of this? Where is God in this? How do I witness to people? What do I say? How am I supposed to respond to the news that I see? What sort of big questions have come up in your mind? And also for next time, we're thinking particularly about the Old Testament. It may be that you've never read the Old Testament very much. It can be difficult in places, but it's worth a read. As I said, the book of Lamentations is recommended reading while we're thinking about what God is doing. But I want to ask you, if you know more about the Old Testament, then which bits of it might be helpful to you at this time, or might have helped you at this time? That's your homework for next week. And if you want to email me, here's my email address. Please send me your messages and I'll try and have a response for next time for you. But otherwise, I'll see you next week and we'll do our next session thinking about God and the pandemic. Thank you very much.